call the meeting to order, and I am going to call for a roll call.
Okay, thank you. Miriam Puentes. Susana Martinez.
I believe she's in the waiting room. Mr. Bassinet, can you elevate her to Susie Martinez to panelist?
Yes, we'll do.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Martinez. We're calling roll. Can you just verify that you can hear us and you're able to use your microphone? I'll come back. Katie Kensock.
Here.
Franklin Hernandez.
Here.
Rachel Ingelskerger.
Here.
Ann Dearborn.
Here.
Veronica Aguayo Ochoa.
Here.
Lori Piombo.
Here.
Brian Teff.
Here.
Susana Martinez. And Miriam Puentes. I'm going to go ahead and reach out to Susana and see if there's some technical.
I'm here. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. Okay.
Have we established quorum?
We have established a quorum. Thank you.
And before you begin, I just want to make sure that we turn on the Spanish interpretation. So I'm going to ask the interpreters to give the directions for those who would like Spanish interpretation to click on the globe that will be present on the bottom right-hand corner. So if you could, one of the interpreters could give those directions, please.
Yes, this is Francisco. I'll do the announcements. I'll make those announcements. Buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a empezar la reunión. Queremos anunciar de que estamos ofreciendo esta reunión tenemos interpretación de inglés a español. Por favor, si pueden, por favor vayan a la parte baja de sus pantallas. Ahí van a ver un mundo como un globo terráqueo. Pulsen ahí para escoger su idioma, español. Just announced that we will be having English interpretation or Spanish interpretation from English to Spanish, and vice versa, to go to the lower part of your screens and select your language of preference, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now the interpretation channel is open. And so we'll give people a minute to access that and then pass it to the chairperson.
Okay. Next agenda item is Assistant Superintendent welcome. So Pat Andrew Jennings.
Thank you, Chairperson Teff. Good evening, everyone. We're happy to have you here tonight as we begin this continue this very important work of the selection of a name for our new middle school language academy. So I'm eager to dig into the agenda, and I'm pleased that everyone is here tonight to help with this process. I don't know, Dr. Massetti, if there's anything you want to add, or nope, she's saying no, we're ready to start. And so I'm going to pass it back to Chairperson Teff.
Next item is acceptance of the agenda. So calling for a motion to accept the agenda as posted and emailed out.
I motion to accept the agenda as emailed out.
Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, we'll call for a vote. All in favor of accepting the agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the agenda is accepted. Next item of business is acceptance of the minutes as posted and emailed out. I need a motion to accept the minutes.
A motion to approve the minutes of August 31st, 2021.
Second?
I second.
All those in favor of accepting the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No one opposed. The minutes are accepted. Moving to our next agenda item, informational item, presentation.
Thank you, Chairperson Teff. Mr. Bassinet, could you please share the slides? So tonight's informational item is a review of the guiding principles from the meeting on our previous meeting, and to review the process that we'll use during the discussion items. So next slide, please. So the guiding principles that are determined to guide our work, as a reminder, there are 2 sets. Next slide, please. The first one is driven by our board policy 7310. So there are 4 items: individuals living or deceased, and entities that have made outstanding contributions, including financial contributions to the school community, individuals living or deceased who have made contributions of statewide, national, or worldwide significance, the geographic area in which a school or building is located, and that it not be similar to the name of any existing district school as to result in confusion to members of the community. Next slide, please. With that, we also want to value the important work that our community has already conducted for the new Middle School Language Academy, focused on the mission and vision. And so as a reminder tonight, before going into this process, the mission is to provide a global education that instills a love for learning and honors languages and cultures. Our vision is that all students are empowered to achieve academic excellence while growing bilingualism, biliteracy, and interpersonal connections in a community that is responsive to the well-being of all of our learners. So these 2 sets of guiding principles are really what drive our work tonight. And as we consider those, we have a driving question for this evening. Next slide, please. The driving question is, when considering the guiding principles that were just outlined, Board Policy 7310 and the mission and vision for the new Middle School Language Academy, in making a name recommendation for the new Middle School Language Academy, what are the interests and considerations that will guide the recommendations? So prior to going into that, we'll review what we mean by interests and what we mean by considerations before going into making some recommendations. Next slide, please. So an interest. Tonight, as you generate interest and you think about the guiding principles, an interest is something that's important. So will we use to evaluate or measure recommendations as you think of a name and measure it back to, does this meet the interests that we have? An example might be that it reflects the values of the school, such as bilingualism and biliteracy, which are incorporated in the mission and vision. Next slide, please. Consideration. Considerations that we might generate tonight are ideas or thoughts that we need to account for in the recommendation process. So these may be things that we want to consider, take a second thought about before moving forward with a recommendation that would be a consideration we have outlined in advance. So for example, avoiding a controversial figure and or considering how that figure would have long-term relevance as a figure for our students, our staff, and our families in connection to the school. Next slide, please. And then lastly, recommendations. If we're able to generate interests and considerations, we may make it tonight to generating some recommendations. So a suggestion or proposal for a name. I want to reiterate that the purpose of this is really to make recommendations that will then go to our Board of Education, not to actually select the name as a part of this process. Next slide, please. So as we think about this, we'll move into community input. So generating, lastly, what information would you like staff to then, after this meeting, go out and gather from the community in order for you to make a name recommendation? So taking the interest, taking the considerations, what other input at the end of this evening as our last item may we need to consider as a staff on this that we can then bring back to a future meeting? Next slide, please. So at this point, I'll take any discussion or questions.
So this is discussion around the presentation we just saw?
Correct.
Does anybody have any questions about what we will be doing tonight? Okay, no questions, and we'll move to our discussion. So 3.1 is discussion of interest and consideration. This will be a led discussion by Monica.
Okay. So Brian, I'm actually I was going to give the presentation and walk through the protocol. If you're comfortable, you can go ahead and lead the discussion portion of this. If not, and I can support.
Okay, happy to. So a little bit of, as we talk amongst each other on the gallery here, let's take this one at a time. So, just interest and consideration are both. This is a free conversation, and it will be, Monica, you are taking notes. And so our discussion amongst the team will be notated, and so that we capture our interest and consideration for later. So as we go through this, we end up with a list of our interest and consideration.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we need clarified is typically, right, if we were in a room together, there would be some charting. And so we will have someone who provides minutes later on. But if we would like to have some visual representation throughout the discussion, I'm more than willing to generate some notes on a Google Doc that we can have a share screen, or if we want to be able to see each other and note those later on through the minutes. It's really up to the committee, and I can do either.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody has experience, but usually we do this in person, or at least in my experience. We are around a wall and some big Post-it notes, and everybody's sort of shouting out ideas. So please don't be shy, and let's go for it. What are some interests that we have? And Monica, can you reread your example of an interest, and then we'll generate some discussion and possible other interests?
I can. So an interest would be, what is something that's important to you that be considered? Will it be, and think about as a name is generated, to go back and say, is this important? Does this meet what we said was an interest? So the example that was given was, does it reflect the values of the school? So something that in particular that arose from the mission and vision was bilingualism and biliteracy. So in a name that was generated, you'd go back and say, does it meet that value that's generated by the group?
Just to reiterate that, so that that's not just an example. I think that needs to be, that's really important, that it needs to reflect that it's a language school.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to what Anne was saying and include that I read over the vision and the mission, like it sort of has stuck in my head during this process. And I think one of the things that my real interest is, I think about the idea of a global citizen. I think as I read it over, and that, the love of learning and language, I think is a real interest for me, because I think about, like, for me, what drew me to NVLA was when I was sort of looking for a dual immersion school. The name of the school really kind of drew to me. And it really connected with the culture of the school as well. So I think that's sort of, in my mind, I think it's going to be important that when someone sees the name or reads the name, that they immediately sort of think there's something special at that school, and that it's connected to a dual immersion program that Napa has.
I have a question. Then does that kind of leave out having the word language in it? Because that would be a confusion for NVLA. Just kind of, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought about that too, and I think my thought is, I think it would be important, if there's a way that we can include language middle school in it in some way, I think would be really important. That's what
a consideration is that it not be confused with other schools. I mean,
right.
That's the board policy, but I think that's something for us to evaluate, is any suggestion or as we suggest a metric for this, that doesn't be confused, whether it has language in the name or not. We'll have to decide that later, but.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great consideration. But I do think that it would be a good continuation, because it does keep it consistent, and it does make a statement that it continues the immersion program there.
I think another consideration is that this is now the merging of two elementary schools, Pueblo Vista and MBLA, and it's a really great opportunity for those students to come together and share all the learnings that they've been through, the bilingual environment that they've been in for the past 5 years, 6 years. And so that embodies both elementary schools and the cultures of both elementary schools.
Something I'd like to take into consideration in even trying to define this space, you know, where we have middle school, elementary school, such name elementary school, but something that really stands out from just the Napa Valley Language Academy is the word academy. It just sets a different kind of tone, and it just has a different connotation to it, or it's not for an outsider, you anticipate that the school is doing much more than just schooling. And so I'd really like to take, you know, the connotative space into consideration, in addition to words like bilingualism, biliteracy, you know, and I was just kind of looking up synonyms of academy, institute. I don't know if that's too big of a word, but just kind of taking that into consideration.
I'd like to take into consideration that the name fit on a t-shirt.
I would like to add that I think it's really important that the name of the school lift up voices that perhaps in history really haven't been centered. And so when I was doing my research this weekend, I was actually looking up mostly Latinx figures that we could potentially name the school after. And so I really liked the sound of some of the middle school names that I thought of with like honoring either a civil rights activist who was bilingual, or even some of the scholars that I was looking at who were Chicano or Latinx. Oh, and I'll just add to that I thought that we could think of a figure potentially who really honored languages and cultures, and so that aspect of the vision would be met.
I'm just going to step in here for just a minute and just sort of go through what I have down so far. That it reflects that it's a language school, that it has something to do with language, that it has something, shows something around being a global citizen. It reflects dual language, embodies the culture of both elementary schools that are feeding into the school, reflects or connotes that it's more than just learning, it's more than just a school. The name fits on a t-shirt, lifts up voices, and honors or lifts up like possibly a Chicano or Latinx figure, like historical or figure. That those are the interests I have so far. And so then just so that everyone knows that they're being captured, what you are saying.
Another interest could be that it honors and ties to the Napa community. I mean, the student population will represent what we are as Napa, and if there's something that we can tie into that is symbolic for us as well as a city.
I would like to go back to review. We're talking interests and consideration. The list that you just read off there, those were interests or were those combined? And do we need to separate? Do we need two separate lists at the end of this discussion?
I don't actually, when it comes down to it, when we get to the point of actually recommending a name or names to the school board, we would go back through all of our interests and considerations and see how close the different names measure against that. Right. So I think it's less important to say, well, is that an interest or is that a consideration? And it's okay for those two to be merged a bit because there's a little bit of overlap.
So the interpreter, Vanessa, you had your hand up. Is that okay? We're good.
I am just gonna speak on if we were to do somebody local, I think it would be Mr. Moreno, Phil Moreno. He's the one that started the program. He had vision along with Deb Wallace, but it was really him that, pushed the school along. he always told me that when the school was more like a bilingual school, he noticed the Spanish speakers were learning English and they knew Spanish too. But he said the English speakers weren't gaining the Spanish. And he, started thinking about the dual immersion and did a lot of research, and him and Deb, came up with that, let's start a dual immersion. So if we went with somebody local, to honor, I feel it would have to be Phil Moreno. Or I would like to consider that if we're thinking of using a person.
And I would say before we get to like recommending maybe specific names, or that we finish up with the interest and the considerations. And so noted around Mr. Moreno.
Just for a local person, or a community person, let's call it.
I have a question, and maybe this is coming under 3.2 for the generation of possible names, but I thought it was mentioned that we may be learning about the land or where the school is at. Is that a future agenda item?
So if that comes up as an interest tonight around the geography of the land, we can bring in a presentation to our next meeting to give some insight about that.
Okay.
So if that is an interest, we can definitely list it.
I would be interested in learning more about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm interested in how some of the other schools were named that I know, maybe some of the newer ones, if there's anybody who can talk to us about how that process went, how, for instance, Willow was named, because I don't know that necessarily meets the school board or our school policy, unless Willow is a place name. And as this is discussion, if anybody was around or has any idea on how that sort of thing happened, I believe we can just talk about it.
Monica, did you want to share, or Alejandra, did you want to share? Because I know you both spoke with Pam Perkins, who was the principal of Willow Elementary, and sort of the process they went through of how they selected that name.
Yeah, so Principal Uribe actually had the opportunity to work with her, so I'm gonna hand it to you.
Yeah. I believe it was a very similar process than what we're engaging in. They also, after the establishment of their committee, they also engage in conversations around interests and considerations. And so they were looking also at their, at their land and their location, but it's a very similar process that what we're following as to what they did. From what from the brief conversation that I had with Mrs. Perkins.
Okay, there are more interests and considerations. This is a rather important list. I think that we have a lot, and Ms. Andrea Jennings, could you maybe read us again and see if we can add a few to it, and if not, we can move to the next agenda item.
Okay, I'll read them again. So it reflects that it's a language school. It reflects the global citizenship nature of the school, the mission, the vision. Reflects that it's dual language, embodies the cultures of both elementary schools, Pueblo Vista and MSLA. Reflects or connotes more than that it's about more than just a learning or more than just a school. The name fits on a t-shirt, very important. Lifts up voices, honors and lifts up Chicano or Latinx figures, and honors ties to the Napa community. I think that's reflective of Lori's comment around those who've contributed to not just the community as a whole, but to the development of dual language in Napa Valley Unified, and then also symbolic, that it's symbolic of the mission and the vision. That is what I've captured so far.
I'd like to add an interest. I think about our students and how they're leaders out in the community. And we've heard this from several people, beyond MSLA, that our students really stand out in the community, and they're volunteering for this, and they're running clubs and just engaging in a lot of leadership opportunities in the community. And I think when I think about a school name, I think about, using this opportunity to capture this influence that our students have in our community. So I think about like an action word. I think about a word that represents movement and like a positive movement in our community. So that this name is just like really powerful and just really captures who our students are in the community. So a word with movement is my interest.
I'd like to add one more thing as well. I noticed when thinking about all of the different names of schools in Napa that most of them are based on the geography. And I just think it's so important, and I know we're all aware of this, but that the name be unique because, like Alejandra was saying, it's such a unique program, and the students that graduate from it have very unique opportunities in the community, and they're leaders. And so I just want to make sure that the name also does stand out from the other schools. And so we might want to try something new, given that most are based on the geographic area.
Okay, well, I think we're ready to really move on. We have a tall order for 1 or 2 words to meet all of those conditions and interests.
I think the goal, chairperson, and TEF, is to get as close as we can, obviously. But I actually wanted to add another. It's not necessarily an interest. It's just a consideration around. We always have to look at and think about what the initials of the school is. So once we come up with, once we have those names, that would be one of the considerations, that it has a good series of letters that reflect the name of the school. So.
Yeah, and also let's bring in the one that we saw in the presentation to be generated from us, that we really ought to look at the long-standing historical background and impact. We don't want a name that we think would be controversial in 25 years or whatnot. So that was the example. I think it really plays as something that we should have as a consideration. We've seen that in our community. Let's not do that again. And then I have a question. How does the school district deal with the mascot and marketing and fun stuff like that after a name is picked? Does anybody know?
So this group is going to work on the name and the recommendation for the name, and then it'll be up to the principal and the students and staff of that school to maybe generate the mascot and all of that. So so that it will be something that's reflective of their mission and vision once we get to that point. The name is probably that first real important piece.
So we hope to set them up for success with
We
our
hope to,
recommendation. Yeah. Okay, I'm ready to move forward unless we have any other interests or considerations to discuss. All right, next agenda item is generation of possible names. Monica, can you talk to us a little bit about how we might run this discussion item? Are you looking for people to put out, as Lori Piombo said earlier, I mean, a well thought out name recommendation at this point?
That's the purpose of this time, is to put out some names and taking into consideration some of what was generated previous to this, as Ms. Sandra Jennings shared. But yeah, this is about idea generation for the name. And I think something that Ms. Piombo modeled was connecting it to the why. So if you can provide that insight into how it makes a connection to maybe some of the interests or considerations that we just shared.
Okay, everybody's got a name. Let's hear them.
I think the more the better. So just be throwing them out there, right?
So I have one. I guess since I didn't want to be the first, but I guess I will be. So yeah, I was trying, I think for me, I was trying to try to think of a word that would be like, try to again, like connect things, right? And I tried to think of a word, I don't know, I was just sort of, again, generating ideas in my head. So I thought about el puente, because it's, you know, the translation is the bridge. So, you know, el puente, you know, middle school, or el puente language, you know, language institute, like Veronica, you know, said, sort of looking for another word. Just because, again, I think about it, it's a bridge between sort of our schools that we have, you know, our 2 great dual immersion schools, and then the program as they move on to high school. So that was one that kind of, one of the first ones I kind of thought about.
Franklin, can you spell
Yes.
that? I don't know how to spell that. I didn't know that was the word for bridge.
Yeah, E-L, and then P-E-L-P-U-E-N-T-E.
Oh,
El puente.
El puente? What?
Puente, el puente.
Puente. Okay.
El puente.
Puente. So, okay, like door, but with an N. Puente. El puente. Okay. Got it.
I would like to echo what Lori said earlier, because that was the one I had on my list, Lori. We were both at, what was then Westwood at the time when Phil Moreno was the principal. And I think it would be wonderful to honor him, because he did bring dual immersion to our school district. He made it possible for a very small group of teachers to go observe successful immersion programs at the time. And I was fortunate to be one of those teachers. And so I just think it would be wonderful to be able to honor him and name it after him, Moreno Middle School Language Academy or Institute, whatever we decide the word to be. But I thank Lori for bringing that up also.
I'll suggest, and this goes contrary to some of our considerations, but we'll have something to pair it against later, is Springwood. And I didn't know this, but in looking at the area and looking at that is the neighborhood of Napa. That is the area that if you go on Zillow, or if you go on the Napa city website, that's what that area is called. It's like Browns Valley, like Westwood, like Alta Heights. And I didn't know that. So I think that is a suggestion, because it fits the model that exists within the school district already.
I want to suggest Sylvia Mendez, going off of Rachel's Latinx trend. That's like the only thing that was coming to my brain with people, but Sylvia Mendez was, her family advocated for the desegregation of schools in Orange County back in, I think, like the 40s. And for Mexican, Latinx communities and the white schools, there's a book, Separate is Never Equal. And maybe we could also go off of something out like that, Separados no somos iguales, something like that.
I actually had Sylvia Mendez Middle School as the top of my list. And I love what Katie said, because I think that students are actually really, well, I don't know if all students, but many students are familiar now with that book. And so they will be growing up familiar with Sylvia Mendez and her contributions. And also I'll just echo that she is an example of someone who honored languages and cultures and was a leader in her community. So she's also a person of state and national importance, and I would argue worldwide.
Yeah, she got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. She was also on my list, Sylvia Mendez. She was one of the first court cases actually to fight for, against white-only schools, and that, of course, led toward bilingual education being allowed in the school. I have several, so I'm just gonna say them. Okay. So we'll just go with it. Let's see. I have the Global Language Academy. Something really simple. I have the Dual Language Global Institute. I have the Ofelia Garcia Language Academy. And Ofelia Garcia is actually one of the leading researchers in bilingual education. She doesn't just fight for bilingual education, but her main thesis is that bilingual education should be a space of transformative education where students are really embodying what it means to be bilingual, biliterate, and have sort of like this fluid identity between English and Spanish, not English or Spanish, but both, right? Whenever they're learning these languages. So she's a leading figure in that. But that's all I have. So and then, going off of the Springwood, I said Springwood Dual Language Academy. So.
Veronica, you said Ofelia Garcia?
Yes,
Okay,
Ofelia Garcia.
It's based in New York.
Yes, she is. Mm-hmm.
I will just really quickly go back to the Silvia Mendez. I did look up to see if there were any other Silvia Mendez middle schools already, and I found that there's a Silvia Mendez elementary school in Berkeley currently, but I did not see any Silvia Mendez middle schools. And then I will add, going off of what Veronica said, I was thinking about Gloria Anzaldua, who's also an American scholar, and she's openly queer, so she represents the LGBTQ community, as well as she also, in her work and her research, has talked a lot about growing up on the Mexico-Texas border and her life experiences, kind of having to navigate her different identities.
Rachel, what was the last name again? Gloria
Anzaldua. It's Anzaldua.
Thank you.
I spoke with my son Vincent, and we were talking, about some ideas, and something he came up with that we might want to consider. And it is an action word, is listo, being ready, listo, middle school, or listo dual immersion, or, something. And I thought, well, that I would put it out there. He's a former student, and he thought that might be interesting. So I think the more that kind of the merrier, right, to put it out there and kind of narrow things down or cross things off. But I like that.
Lori, I thought you were going to say Hermanos Piombo.
Yeah, he would probably like that. And I don't know how anybody feels about this, but our sixth graders are in a program called Corazón Unidos, which is United Hearts. Or Global United Heart, I don't know. It's really not language, but that's kind of cool, because I think Pueblo Vista might be using that Corazón Unidos and bringing that volunteer piece. It's something that MSLA always did with their sixth graders, and it was just having them become leaders in our school. So the sixth graders would volunteer in the library, in the lunchroom, in the garden, and to get that community service piece. And then we would go up to the veterans home, and they would learn about veterans, and we'd have some guest speakers, and then we would go up to the veterans home, and they would visit the veterans and make them cards and be serving in their community that way. So I don't know if that's anything we would want to have, that emphasis on community service or United Hearts, Corazón Unidos.
I have just a quick question about that. Is that like the branded name of a program or?
No, it's just something, Franklin, I think, and Patty Magro. It was kind of just an organic thing with our 6th grade. Since we kept them there another year, we put them to be leaders. So it's not, anything established, but it has been going on at NVLA for, 10 years, Franklin, at least.
Yeah, it's been long, I think longer than that.
Mhm.
Yeah, we wanted to really incorporate community service. So we just brainstormed a name of like, okay, well, what could we call this piece that we're having our students do? And then we came up with the idea of Corazones Unidos. And that's part of sort of the 6th graders, they get to choose different things that they can do at the school. So if it's like helping out in the garden, as a TA, working with some of the kindergartners, just all these different kind of things that they did. And then we always would also do every year, we would do a trip to the Veterans Home, where they would spend the day there, sort of, again, a piece of community service. But so that's what we would do. And it's been just, for me, it's been a pretty amazing experience, sort of having the students, especially the visit to the Veterans Home has been one of the things I think I'll never forget.
I'll just add a quick comment on that. I really like that. Perhaps like just maybe using just the word corazón. So saying like Corazon Dual Language Academy, because when I look at the word corazon, not only is it a Spanish word, right? And I think most English speakers might understand what a corazon is. Number 2, the hearts, right? It's a symbol for love and empathy, and even kindness. And then when you think of the word corazon, it's like the most essential part of what makes a person, right? The person's heart. And when I look at the vision and the mission, I think about how we really want to institute the importance of bilingualism and biliteracy. We want to make sure that we are embodying our students as like these global citizen figures. And so I just feel like that word in itself, corazon, like Dual Language Academy, really just kind of takes that all under an umbrella very nicely. So I like that.
Any other ideas for name suggestions that we can record tonight?
Oh, one more comment. The Corazon Dual Language Academy fits nicely on a t-shirt.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, not to sound too much like NVLA, but I really like, and I'm still trying to think of the word, but something Dual Language Academy of the Napa Valley. And I really like the use of a Spanish word, whether it's corazón or el puente, but I think the use of a Spanish word would be good.
So there was another word, another name that I was thinking of, because I also, Brian, like what you did, you looked at the geographic sort of map. So I kind of did look up on the neighborhoods, and then where the current campus is would be in that I think it's Springwood. But then on the other side, sort of looking towards the hill, that neighborhood is called Linda Vista. Which I'd never heard. And I was like, is that really, so now, and I looked it up. And then if you go to the city of Napa, that neighborhood, it's just right over on the other side of 29 is called Linda Vista. And there's, again, it's, that's the idea of like the beautiful view and sort of, so that was another sort of one that popped into my head too, when I was trying to look also like geographic names. I figured there must be a neighborhood that has, Spanish somewhere in that, there are, but it was just another one that maybe hasn't been used. And so that name came.
Well, we can go down this path, and there's a very street real nearby the campus that's Hermosa, right? Hermosa Language Academy.
Mm.
That would work. It's funny that the street is Escuela Street that the school is on. I don't know if anybody saw that.
Yeah.
I love Linda Vista. It's kind of looking into their future, looking at a beautiful future of being dual immersion, being bilingual.
I was gonna throw out Un Mundo Leadership and Language Academy. Again, going back to like the global aspect, right, of our students, and then not just the Language Academy, but also the Leadership Academy, I think would be a great addition to the name. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier of just having that kind of movement and fluidity in the name, that our students are engaged in positive influence in our community. So hence the leadership piece in there. So Un Mundo Leadership and Language Academy.
Can you repeat that again, Alejandra?
Yeah, Un Mundo.
Mundo.
Yeah. Leadership and Language Academy. I don't know how that would look like on a t-shirt, Brian. That's my only concern.
There's some graphic imagery with that. It's LLA, something LLA, MLLA. Okay, has anybody heard any names from their friends, your friends, or colleagues, as they know that you're on this committee? I think that's our suggested list for this evening. Can we play the name game? Did anybody write it down, or will that come out later in our minutes? No, I'm not putting anybody on the spot here. I didn't write them all down.
I was writing them down. I don't know if Monica was as well.
Yeah, I can share the Google Doc that has the interests and considerations and some of the names, and maybe we can pause for a minute here and see if there's any interests or considerations that we haven't probed or really captured yet in the names that have been generated. So give me 60 seconds to get this up on the screen. So I don't know if I quite captured them similarly to what was shared earlier, but there are the interests and considerations combined. And then I'll scroll down in a minute.
So I'll take a volunteer. Somebody want to read the names?
I can read them. We have, I'll just read them as on the list without whether it would be Language Academy or dual immersion or middle school. Moreno, El Puente, Springwood, Sylvia Mendez, Global Language Academy, Dual Language Global Institute, Ophelia Garcia Language Academy, Gloria Anzaldua. How do you say that? ¿Cómo se dice? Gloria
Anzaldua.
Anzaldua. Listo. Corazón Unidos. Linda Vista. Hermosa. And Un Mundo Leadership and Language Academy.
Can I just add just the word corazón?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna work off of Alejandra's Un Mundo, Un Corazón leadership.
Ooh.
Or Un Mundo, One Heart, like going Spanish and English, Un Mundo, One Heart.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool.
I like that as a slogan. I like that.
Katie, could you say both of those one more time?
Okay, so both Spanish, Un Mundo, Un Corazón. And then in English, Un Mundo, One Heart. Un Mundo, Un Corazón.
And it would be kind of cool to, build a slogan, at least if not the name. NVLA's is Two Languages, One Heart. Kind of have, if it's not in the name, at least in a slogan with a nod to NVLA like that.
And we also have to be mindful of that it is 2 schools and Pueblo Vista as well.
Yeah.
I was actually an area as reviewing the list. I think some of these capture like global and Corazón Unidos. If that was one area or one interest that we needed to explore a little more, this idea of multiple schools coming together and representation of that, knowing that that will continue on.
Just a point of interest, Pueblo Vista is dual immersion and environmental sciences. I don't know if there's anything we can tie in with the environmental sciences, like taking care of the planet, or that's why I also was thinking Napa community. I know that we can't really do like wine or anything like that, but I was thinking vines, but there's no really great translation of vine in Spanish or grapevine.
Vineyard.
Uva, uva.
Heart of the Valley, Corazón del Valle, or something like that.
Ooh. Heart of the Valley.
Oh, El Corazón.
That's really beautiful.
I wanted to add, I really liked Alejandra when you talked about the leadership piece in it. I think that having that like leadership, again, I know it kind of really takes up a lot of the space on the t-shirt, but I think, having part of the word, I think leadership is great because then again, I think it adds to, again, the uniqueness of, I think, the dual immersion programs in Napa, just like Pueblo Vista and their program and sort of that uniqueness of the science and the language. And then NVLA, we have our Corazones Unidos and sort of, I guess, like the beginnings of the immersion program at NVLA. So I really like leadership. I just kind of wanted to just say that if it would be great to include that. And again, it draws, really kind of makes it unique, adds that uniqueness to it.
And this isn't a name, but as we've been talking about this, and I think about the program that's being built, and my research, just Google research, was one of the things that's really special about this is it's a middle school. It's a standalone middle school. There seem to be a lot of dual immersion programs that are K-8, but there's not a lot of middle school language programs, and it'd be nice to have that in there. That's unique. And I don't know where I picked this up, but I saw somewhere that California, the state of California, is really putting a lot of weight behind dual immersion schools, and some like 35 or 34, they're expecting one out of every 4 kids to be educated in a dual immersion environment. So that's coming up. So we're hopefully ahead of the curve on this. So I guess that's more of a consideration, is to call it out that this is a middle school program.
I'd like to, I don't want to chime in too much as superintendent or staff member, and I definitely want to leave this in the hands of the advisory committee members, but I do want to kind of elaborate on what our chair, Brian Teef, has brought up. I've spent the course of the last few days making statewide contacts through the Twoway Immersion statewide affiliate and organization. And as I share with them conceptually what we're building, I've gotten phone calls from some of the, original statewide leaders of immersion, like back in the, these are like the founding mothers of immersion in California in the 70s and 80s, who are still kind of advancing and remaining very involved in this kind of, effort that you're describing, which is true for California public schools, Brian, the statistic that you're kind of laying out and what people are seeing kind of in a post-pandemic education innovation environment. We've been doing it for a long time here, but with the racial reckoning, with the crisis, the socio-emotional learning, the focus on inclusivity, I think there's going to be a strong resurrection and recommitment at a statewide level to immersion as an educational, pathway and philosophy in the post-pandemic environment. And so that was kind of some of my conversations with these statewide leaders. And they were just so excited about this concept of a standalone middle school focused on the immersion model. And so Brian's really right. We know there's a ton of elementary. We know K-8 has been explored, but this idea of a focus. And then when you layer the leadership piece that Principal Udiva keeps repeating, coupled with service, it's a very kind of just a tremendous synergy around, I think, what is going to be the post-pandemic emphasis in education in terms of a model, and then for middle school, those lost years. So I agree with Brian, the emphasis on it, being a standalone, and I don't know if that's in the name or, because I know that's a decision to be made by the committee members, but I do, just from a very big picture statewide context perspective. And I think those of you that work with me know, like, we will be involved at the state level. We will advance this as a model in the state. I mean, that will be an effort because we like to shape education in NVUSD. We like to be at the forefront. So I think that that's important to just note. And so how that gets captured and how you all flush that out is up to you. But I just want to emphasize that point, like, extensively.
Okay, names? If not, we'll move to our next agenda item. Provide community input and guidance. What is our objective here?
So this piece is really, as we go to the next step, to broaden the circle and seek some input, maybe not specifically around name suggestions, but around some of the interests and values around those particular interests. One maybe weighted over the other, like honoring someone versus the geography of the land. What information do you need as a committee that staff can go out and gather and bring back to the committee?
Can you restate that last statement there?
Yes. What information do you need? What further information, now that we've had time to generate interest, some considerations, and some names, what else would you need our staff to go out and gather? So for example, geography came up as an interest, so gathering some information around geography, or seeing what, from what's been generated tonight, what would you want to know about these interests, considerations, and names? What would you want to know from our larger community as we go out and gather information in the format yet to be determined?
And I will just, to add a little more clarification, if we're thinking about, we have this list of names, what information from the community, or what kind of input do you want to solicit from the community around the selection of these names? Like, what is it that you want to hear regarding that will help you to make a recommendation in the selection of a name?
I would like to hear community suggestions for a name. Why limit our creativity? Let's hear it. And I think that that would be great if that was not completely limited to somebody who responds to a parent square survey.
Brian, I agree with that. And I was also thinking along the lines of maybe even involving some of our 5th and 6th graders who will be going to this school. See what kind of ideas they could come up with.
I love the idea of involving the students. I think that's going to be really important that we hear their voices.
I think also kind of piggybacking on the idea of involving students, it would be really amazing to have have them maybe even draw a picture of what they would imagine the school being like. And then we could even look at that and kind of generate names based on their visual, like what they visualize it looking like. And I think what's important to them could come up through their drawings as well.
Mm-hmm. So Rachel, just to clarify, you talk like so having them do some visioning activity, and from that, whether it's like they draw a picture or even just describing the school might help to select the name. Okay.
Like what would you like it to look like and what would happen at that school if you were there?
Okay, thank you.
That could be a good way to solicit information from parents too. They can describe, although I don't know if that's already been done possibly with the like design of the middle school, but if you were going to reach out to parents, that could be another idea.
From the staff, I'd like some sort of a conversation around the reach of this new middle school, you know, obviously from Pueblo Vista and NVLA, but what are the thought process? How far do we go out with that? You know, looking for creative names and things like that. Is there any way? I mean, NVLA and Pueblo Vista is a very small part of Napa Valley Unified. How do we get people from South County? You know, I don't know. I'm wondering about the middle school, if that is a point of access into a dual immersion program, right? Because I think that's come up in the conversations is that Pueblo Vista and NVLA are going to populate the school, but there's a need for other students to come into the school as well. So what is the expected reach of the school?
So and sort of in response to that, there's still work being done sort of on the programming and design of what the experience might look like for students who aren't entering from a dual language program. I think that's why I think it came up several times from committee members around the importance of having the word language or knowing that there's some emphasis on sort of that global language piece that's the development of a second language or a third for some kids. And so that will come up either in the name or in the programming aspect of the school. So it does have a reach because it will be open to, you know, middle schoolers who aren't part of Pueblo Vista or NVLA, because there will be space in the initial years for students who are attending other schools.
Can I ask a clarifying question about that? For students who are interested in coming who did not attend NVLA or Pueblo Vista, will that be a lottery process if there's more interest than space?
I would have to double check with our enrollment department, but that is my understanding that typically is done by lottery. You know, if there's, you know, it's not done by first put their open enrollment application in, gets it. So it probably would be done by a lottery. The school does have, and I'll see if Dr. Massetti wants to make sure I'm saying this correctly, but my understanding is that students who are attending Pueblo Vista and NVLA would have priority admission. That would be their school that they would be matriculating to, and it's the space that's left would be, you know, students who applied for open enrollment would be then slated to go there based on space availability.
That is correct. So the way we initially sort of shaped the enrollment, policy as we considered the consolidation and repurposing of the campus was that you would have priority enrollment into the academy when you make that decision as a kindergartner at either of the two feeder elementary schools, which would be PV and or MBLA, Pueblo Vista or Napa Valley Language Academy. And then any seats available beyond that would be through an open enrollment lottery process.
Has the committee given enough guidance for what kind of input we're looking for?
Yes, I think we have some good guidance of things that we need to gather between now and our next meeting. We will be looking, some information on geography, sort of the geography of the area. Also, if there are any community suggestions for names, and involve the students in that, sort of providing information through either a survey or some kind of visioning activity with some of the 5th and 6th grade students, or even 4th grade. And then also soliciting information from parents regarding the selection of the name. Did I capture everything? Is there anything else?
Okay, I think we're ready to close this agenda item, and our next agenda is public comment.
Mr. Chair Teef, can I just, for technical clarity, I was just taking a look at the agenda, and we have a statement on the agenda where we have dedicated time for public comment for anything related to the Middle School Language Academy naming process. That's not agendized. That's how the statement reads in this public comment segment of the agenda. And so given that, as we moved through the first round of items, we could have prompted and asked for public comment item for item. So I would request first, just for the record, if you could ask for public comment on any of the agenda items that have been discussed thus far, and then do a second ask for public comment on any non-agenda items related to the Middle School Language Academy naming process.
Okay, got it, will do. So at this time, I'm calling for public comment on any of the agenda items that we've just been through. And I'll read the statement. At this time, members of the public may address the committee regarding matter of public interest on any agenda items. No action will be taken on comments unless significantly authorized by law. If the speaker wishes to address the committee on an item on the agenda, time will be provided in the second round. Sorry, I'm kind of messing this up. I'm going to go for it again. At this time, we're calling for public comment on the agenda items that we've just discussed. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. I'm not sure who's running the tech on this.
We'll make that clearer on the next agenda. So there's just so many ways to approach this, but yes, agenda items and then non-agenda items related to the name. So thank you.
So this is public comment on the agenda items. I'm not sure who's running the tech. Is there any way to see if there are comments?
Mr. Bassinet, can you see?
Yeah, at this moment, there is no public comment.
Okay, now we are calling for public comment on non-agenda items. And comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Mr. Bassinet, are there anybody wanting to comment on non-agenda items?
There is no public comment for non-agenda items.
And at this time, I will call for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Everybody wants to stay?
I motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any,
Aye.
any opposed? No? Thank you, everyone. Good night.
All right, thank you.
Brian.
Thank you.
All right.
Judy. Thank you, staff.
Bye.
Thank you.
Great
Bye.
job. Thank
Bye.
you.